Okay. Well, it looks like we're at about time, so we'll go ahead and get started. So again, as I'm talking a little bit, I'm going to stay on the screen for just a moment, and you can again take a moment and answer the poll questions. So my name is John Mann, and I work with the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, and we host a webinar series called Innovations in Agriculture and Rural Development. And so today's webinar is a little bit different from our regular format in that we're going to talk more broadly about university innovation systems. So I want to welcome everybody to our webinar. The title is Diverse Roles of Universities and Regional Innovation Ecosystems, Case Studies from the University of California Campuses. So I'm going to flash the screen real quick because I want to highlight something, so I apologize if you're in the middle of answering those poll questions. We'll get to those again at the very end of the presentation. So before we get started, I want to make a quick pitch for the regular series that we do, the Innovations in Agriculture and Rural Development. And so our general framework for that is our goal is with the regular series, is to help disseminate new innovations and try to facilitate connections between the researchers and potential end users of the technology. So I've got a little slide thing up here, and I just want to show you our next webinar, which is next week. And so Mike Laddish from Purdue and a colleague, they're going to talk about their efforts to provide instruments for rapid detection of pathogens and microorganisms in the food industry. So if you've got any questions about this webinar or the series itself, please send me an email. So I'm going to flash the screen. I'm going to change the screen one more time. We'll get to our presentation. So real quick before I introduce the speaker, and let these slides load here for just a second. At the very bottom of the screen, I want to point out the Q&A box. So as we're going forward with the presentation, as your questions come up, please feel free at any point to enter those into the box. And so just type in the line, and we'll see your questions, and we'll get to the question and answer session at the conclusion of the presentation. Okay, so now a little bit more about our presenter. So Dr. Martin Kenney is a professor in the Department of Human and Community Development at the University of California, Davis, and a senior project director at the Berkeley Roundtable on the International Economy. So Martin and his co-author, David Mowery, have a new book out titled Public Universities and Regional Growth, Insights from the University of California. So today, Martin's going to talk with us a little bit about his research related to the project. So Martin, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, John, and thank all of you. I thank all of you for listening in, and I hope we'll have a productive time. I've been thinking about university industry relations now for since my dissertation on the development of the biotechnology industry is about 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Recently, because particularly public universities have, as you know, and perhaps knowing from California, have had financial issues. And in many respects, people don't understand the role of universities in regional ecosystems. So what we did, Dave Mowery and I, Dave is at UC Berkeley in the business school, the Haas Business School, we collected together a group of authors from a wide variety of disciplines, not just the UC system. And what we decided to do was take a look at university roles in specific regional ecosystems. So this is not an overall sample of all of the things universities do, et cetera, et cetera. These are very deep case studies of particular relationships. And what I'm going to do is go through our learnings from these case studies and from the overall project. And with that, let me just start and give you a brief outline of the talk. First of all, I'm going to situate this in what we call the California knowledge economy. California is increasingly a knowledge economy. We make some things, but we don't make very many things anymore in California. We do grow a lot in the Central Valley, but you know that agriculture, as you know, is stressed by drought. And our argument is and you'll see that in the discussion of the Napa case study, is that agriculture also has to become a knowledge economy, particularly in high income, environmentally sensitive environments. So I'll talk a little bit generally about the California knowledge economy to situate the universities. I'll talk then about university-industry relations. Then I'm going to briefly discuss the linear model of tech transfer and other tech transfer models that we discovered in the process of doing our case studies. So that will then get me to the reality in other domains, and this time in particular outside of biotech. I'm going to talk very briefly about who starts firms, because when we at universities, right? Because when we think about who starts firms, we usually think about professors. I'm going to argue that's correct, but that's too narrow. Then I'm going to briefly reflect upon is the role of the university commercialization or engagement? I think you'll see why I pose that question. Then I'll make a few concluding remarks and open it up for questions. So, okay, California's knowledge economy. California's share of USPTO patents is growing. You can see the yellow gold line there, or space there. And as the share of patents at the USPTO that the United States firms patent has been dropping, California's share has been increasing, as has Massachusetts, but it's a much smaller state and much lower base. You see, other states have actually been decreasing their percentage. So California is really going in that direction. Texas has also slightly increased its percentage. So California is really becoming more and more dependent upon knowledge. Global top 50 universities, California, you can see that's in a list in terms of ranking. That's the Shanghai Jiao Tong Academic World Ranking of universities. And you can see the UK and New York are slightly different. And what you'll see in there is the investment that this state has made in the public universities: Berkeley, LA, San Diego, UC San Francisco, Santa Barbara, UC Irvine, UC Davis, and then the three privates, Stanford, Caltech, and USC. So you can get a real feeling of what the state has invested in its universities. This is venture capital disbursement by region. Red is Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley generally today captures about 30 to 35% of all venture capital investment. Southern Cal is number 3. Number 2 or 3, usually New York and Boston are the other competitors. Texas is far less. So this is another sort of measurement of the entrepreneurial knowledge economy. So just to give you sort of an idea of where we're situated in the global economy. First principle we need to always remember at U.S. universities. The bulk of the funds come from 4 sources. In the U.S., in California, research, federal government funding, and others is number 1. Tuitions is number 2. Services such as academic medical centers and hospitals is number 3, perhaps tied with the state. The state really is no longer a key funder of the University of California. That's an exaggeration, of course, because about 9% of our funds come from the state through support for students. But you can see that U.S. universities are increasingly based on research and the other services, and obviously with the big privates, endowments, but UC Berkeley is building up its endowment rather rapidly. This is licensing income as a percentage of university R&D expenditures. I took this from a National Academy of Sciences report. And what you see is that licensing income as a percentage of R&D expenditures for the vast bulk of the institutions is less than 5%. And obviously, it's between 1% and 2%. So licensing income, that's licensing income from university inventions, is not a big source of income. It's nice income, but it's not a big source of income. And We also know that many tech licensing offices or tech transfer offices are not profit making. They're probably breaking even or losing money. The other interesting thing is the private sector does not support university R&D. Again, that's an exaggeration, but it's under 10%. For a university like MIT, probably the strongest tech university in the world, it is over 10%. But that does give you a feeling of exactly how much the licensing income, private sector income counts for the university. Not very much. It's the federal government that supports the R&D. And then you'll see that purple line is the academic institutions themselves supporting R&D. So the benefits from the university flow from the core missions of research and teaching. Research and training dwarf all formal and informal transfer activities, except insofar as research and training is an informal transfer activity. Licensing income is far less than sponsored research and philanthropy. And university extension, here I'm not thinking so much about agricultural extension, which of course is very important in the agricultural sector, but the university extension programs like UC Davis has the University Extension Wine Program, been very important throughout the state for extending knowledge. That's not ag extension, that's the university extension arm. UC San Diego, we showed in the wireless sector, which Qualcomm, the big UC San Diego spinoff, in the chapter on wireless in UC San Diego, shows that the university extension was a very important contributor to after graduation knowledge, right? Extension delivery. And the chapter describes that in great detail. I won't actually touch upon that so much in this presentation. So what are the tech transfer models? Well, here I have on one side what I might call the Vannevar Bush will be on your, let's see, as I'm looking at it, it's on my right side. And Vannevar Bush in 1945 hypothesized a tech transfer model that was basic. You would do basic research, then you would have applied research done in the university or perhaps in the corporate sector, development done in the corporate sector, and you would have a product. Now, the Vannevar Bush linear model has been largely disproven in the academic literature, but what I will argue is that when we look at biotechnology, that is the red on your left side, you have the university lab develops and discloses a technology. The tech transfer office, if it decides the technology is commercializable and should be patented, the tech transfer office patents it, and then the tech transfer office has to make a choice. Sometimes there is no choice because there's only one potential licensee. Most cases, of course, there's no licensee because, like all patents, most of them are not of any value. You can either direct license it to big pharma, or you could license it to a venture capital funded, or perhaps not a VC funded, maybe using an SBIR or an STTR, venture capital funded startup, right? And there's the first big problem for the tech transfer office. Because if you direct license to a big pharma, of course, they can pay. They have the money, so they can pay. If, however, in 90% of the cases, licensing the technology to big pharma means you're licensing and the technology was developed out of state, out of region. Right? Not always the case, but often the case. Or you could do to a startup, which most of the cases is very close to the university, often with university personnel involved. And so those are the two choices. The venture capital funded startup, or the startup often in the end sells out to big pharma, and you have new drugs or perhaps new medical devices. This is the model that everybody thinks of when we think about tech transfer. It's the Bayh-Dole model. And we all know the Bayh-Dole Act passed in 1980 transferred ownership of all federally funded inventions to the university, right? And then the university could choose to patent it. The Bayh-Dole Act was largely passed because Congress felt that university inventions were not coming to the market, because at that, federally funded university inventions were not coming to the market because the federal government owned the patent. So this is the linear biotech model that we all know and we all think of when we're thinking about university tech transfer. Okay. But what we did in this particular book, which is quite different from most of the research, the academic research on technology transfer, almost all of it is on biotechnology and the Bayh-Dole model. I mean, if you look at all the management literature, that's what people are writing about. If you look at what Autumn generally writes about, that's the Association of University Technology Managers. It's a misnomer. It's really the Association, University Technology Transfer Office Managers, but they call themselves Autumn. That's the reality they think about. Now, the reality is a little bit different in other fields, and our case studies show this, and some of the other research that's out there isn't a lot, also shows this. Let's take, for example, the engineering model. The engineering model is really quite interesting because academic research clearly creates results. Google, right, is a Stanford licensed technology. And so the academic research created some results, a page ranking algorithm that Stanford patented. And then the two graduate students, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, left and started a little firm called Google and raised some money. And, the rest is history. But what we found in our chapters show is that in the engineering model, very often firms, let's say like Intel, does cutting-edge semiconductor research. Cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing research is cutting-edge material science. That's what it is, because it's now at the atomic level. If you're thinking about making a semiconductor, an Intel chip that's sitting in your computer or in a smartphone, that is cutting-edge material science research. And that cutting-edge research and development in Intel actually creates academic problems, interesting, basic academic problems. And so the firms often feed back to the academic research problems, cutting edge, problems that Nobel Prize kind of problems, not, just how can we do something a little bit better, mundane research, but Berkeley, Stanford, MIT level engineering research, right? So what you have in the engineering model that I want to show here in this very simple diagram is knowledge transfer going from firms to academic research, and of course going from academic research to firms. So you have a very different interaction than that more linear biotech model. And so the engineering model then says that engagement with industry, not engagement of anything industry wants done, but we're talking about industry having real problems that academicians can do cutting edge research on, is very important. So that feedback loop there is very important. Then let's move over to the scientific instruments model. And again, we have a case study of UC Santa Barbara with a company called Digital Instruments, which was a spin out from UC Santa Barbara and was a quite successful firm. It was eventually sold for, this has been years ago, for about $400 million, which in those days was a successful firm. There you have basic research, often physics research or biological research, where in the process of doing the research, the researchers develop a scientific instrument. They develop a gadget, a widget, something that does something, right? In the case of UC Santa Barbara, it was scanning probe microscopy. And so basic research yields this scientific instrument. Sometimes, frequently, the scientist will start a bootstrap firm. Often these firms start by other scientists say, hey, I'd like to use that instrument. And the inventor says, well, here, I can send you a kit. Here are all the pieces. You got to put it together. I'm not actually yet, not now, in the process of trying to make money on this. If the demand in scanning probe microscopy, the demand was enough, the professor, or actually one of his friends, spun off Digital Instruments to start commercializing probe microscopy. Okay, it was a bootstrap firm, no venture capital involved. In the early days, no patents involved. Right? It's a bootstrap firm. They started up. It starts to grow. They have a product. Okay, which is this microscope. The bootstrap firm was located close by to campus, and what we document is what happened very quickly is there was an interaction between the firm and the lab, the physics lab where the microscope was first developed. And it's quite interesting. The Digital Instruments microscope pictures ended up on the front page of Science from the HANSMA, the university lab. Science magazine getting the front page for our scientist friends is a very big deal to get your picture on the front page of Science. So what started to happen is you started getting interaction. The physics lab would start to do different things with the microscope, and the firm would go, oh my gosh, well, we can now enter that market with the knowledge from the university. Simultaneously, graduate students, when they needed a part or something, would just drive over to Digital Instruments and pick the part up and take it back to campus. So you had a very porous boundaries, which of course reinforced the firm's success, but it made UC Santa Barbara the center in the end for nanotechnology research, for which Santa Barbara has raised tens of millions of dollars and become one of the national centers, and has won Santa Barbara a number of Nobel Prizes. Not actually the physics lab, but people in that materials science space that interacted with not only the bootstrap firm Digital Instruments, but then Digital Instruments started to have other firms spin off doing other things. And so you got a scientific instrument cluster around probe microscopy, right? The time horizon is really interesting there because there is no time horizon. They started selling what was made. It's the time horizon to product is a little bit difficult to actually decide because in that interstitial space between the university and the firm, and even before the firm actually existed, you had some kind of proto-commercialization. So this is a very deep interaction that's somewhat similar to the engineering model, but also a little bit different. And we believe that's because it's around this particular thing, a scientific instrument. So these are different models that one could think about. And of course, I wanted to add in, if you look at the engineering model, the other thing that we discovered was at UC Berkeley, which was our case study, they were creating open source software. Open source software that then became very, very important for the Silicon Valley region. And I'll go into this in a little greater detail, and you'll see here how software that could have been patented was not patented, but was just released into the environment and created an incredible amount of economic activity that, of course, later on gets reflected in tax dollars that come back to the state of California. So in this case, some of the work coming out was patented, some of it was not, just open sourced and released to the community, and in the end created enormous value for the Bay Area, which helped make it, one of the leaders in the world. So also in the scientific instruments model, you had those interactions, right? Very deep interactions that are not as typical in the biotech model. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the UC Berkeley EECS case study, Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and tell you about some of the things we saw that we believe are much more generalizable. As we think about tech transfer, we need to see this when we start to make tech transfer policy at the university level, at the state level, and of course at the national level. And what's been proven over and over and over, the most important thing is students in industry continuing their relationship with the professors. That was absolutely critical. What we saw is consulting, which some people worry about and think in the public universities is dangerous, and there are reasons to be concerned about it. That consulting in the electrical engineering computer science case was a bidirectional technology and problem transfer process. So by going out and working in industry, by doing consulting, here, of course, we're consulting not at the very sort of mundane level, but we're consulting at the highest levels. You got bidirectional technology and problem transfer. The other thing that has happened is, of course, professors hired from industry. So hiring professors from industry, Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, do this. Not anybody from industry, but researchers from industry brought in, and I'll show you later, some case studies, brought in knowledge from industry that was important. Here we're thinking about engineering, but we could also potentially be thinking about that in scientific instruments. Professors taking sabbaticals in industry. Industry researchers taking sabbaticals at the university. We saw all of these things happening, right? These are both important. One could certainly imagine that in many agricultural sectors where you had this back and forth movement. Industry contributing software, money, and equipment to the university for research. And then the importance of open source. Now, we think about open source in software, but the ag colleges in our universities have been open source. We haven't thought of it that way, but they've been open source, creating knowledge and then extending it and releasing it, often for free, to the community of agriculturalists. So here's Berkeley Unix. Berkeley Unix was probably the most important software program ever developed. It's the basis of Apple's OS X, Linux, etc. Right? So Berkeley Unix was software developed at Bell Labs. A UC professor saw it and asked for a copy, and UC Berkeley licensed it. UC Berkeley graduate students were also doing internships at Bell Labs to learn Unix. A Bell Labs researcher spent a year on sabbatic teaching Unix at UC Berkeley. Again, you can see this interaction. UC Berkeley developed the software and then provided a version for free to the public. So that's the Linux, OS X, etc. Very, very, very important for the development of the internet, because Berkeley Unix had TCP/IP, the Internet Protocol, integrated in. A Berkeley PhD student took BSD and helped to found Sun Microsystems, which was one of the most important computer companies in the 80s. Also, the SendMail program, what came out of there. This was all free, right? Just given out, but became the foundation for Silicon Valley, not the foundation, one of the key technologies for the development of Silicon Valley, right? So here you have a story of Berkeley developing this technology, right, at public universities, saying we're not going to patent it, we're just going to give it out. They give it out, it becomes then a very vital part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. This is not the biotech model, right? There's no patents involved, none of that, but the technology quickly goes out into the environment and then becomes the basis for value creation. And of course, the basis for tax dollars in the long run is value creation. This is the UC Berkeley professors and the electronic design automation software industry. This is chip design software, right? And what I have in the blue boxes is the professors. They're around the outside. Then I have the firms and the firm founders. The red are UC Berkeley graduates, usually PhDs. And you can see the interactions. Then, of course, there's a lot of acquisition in this space. This really created the electronic design software industry in Silicon Valley. This was absolutely critical for the refurbishing of Silicon Valley when the Japanese competition started to destroy Silicon Valley's semiconductor industry in the 1975-1980 period, and this is the basis of the fabless semiconductor firms. Karl Koitzer, which you'll see in your lower right hand, was a researcher in industry who came back and became a professor, and then he became an advisor to all of these small firms. Now, the important story here is, once again, this is not the biotech model. There's no patents involved, but there's an incredible amount of social value created by university research. The other thing that happened was these firms down here and the very wealthy individuals started to contribute money back to the university, which again created a lot of income for UC Berkeley that then could be reinvested in research and keep the process going. So let's talk briefly about the wine industry. This chapter was written by Jim Lapsley, who wrote the book Bottled Poetry, The History of Napa Valley. I mean, really an expert on this topic. If you look at so what we show here is we show the evolution of the university and what the university did and what the industry did. And that was a coevolution over time of the two. And as Napa Valley became scientifically increasingly sophisticated, the wineries themselves became more sophisticated, often with UC Davis graduates. What UC Davis did changed over time also. And the value for Napa and for UC Davis was not in patents. There was very little patenting, but it was actually turns out to have been down the road the contributions by grateful Napa winemakers, grateful for Davis. So Mr. Mondavi, who was a Stanford graduate, gave us $35 million. The Rossi family gave us $13 million in agricultural land in Napa. The founder of Clos Pegase gave $5 million recently to UC Davis. None of them were UC Davis graduates, but they were grateful for what the university did for them. In the early years, the industry leaders, in the early years, I'm talking about 1950s and 60s, had little formal knowledge. UC Davis had to provide the very most basic winemaking tools, things like how to keep the wine, the winery clean, sanitary, right? They even ran wine tasting events at the state fair, right? And this is very basic stuff. But the wine industry of Napa had very little knowledge. So Davis was actually doing the very most basic, almost unscientific work, you could say. I mean, in the 1950s, it's more scientific. Today, this would be considered just good manufacturing practices, right? Later, as the industry becomes more capable, less practical training is needed, and the university's activities become more scientized. But we continued to develop new techniques that were offered freely to the wine industry. And the wine industry, of course, sent people here to learn. And, of course, we interacted with the wine industry to find out what their problems were so that we could meet some of their needs. And this is really basic ag science, over 50 years, but Napa is such an interesting case because it becomes a global class wine region. Our 2012 study of the Napa wine industry websites, we went to the websites and just pulled off who was the winemaker. Almost 80% claimed their winemaker was trained at Davis. So if we think of all of the value that UC Davis created for the wine industry, I think there's no doubt it was actually our training, but it was our training by research scientists, right? So we're training them at the very cutting edge of what the scientists know were doing at the time, right? And we've had, again, this is a great success story, but it shows, again, that this was not the biotech tech transfer model. It's a very different tech transfer model where the tech transfer office was hardly involved at all. And the question there would be, could the tech transfer office, by being involved, would it have improved the tech transfer? So the UC Davis Napa Valley interactions evolved. Today it's a $6 billion wine and tourism industry. Deep interaction, mutual learning, this going back and forth. Trained students, I mean, here we're talking trained in science students, are critical for the process, right? So that what we could see in the biotech, in the engineering space, we see differently in this particular case study of agriculture. Okay, again, not the biotech model, and no patents basically involved. There were a few patents, but very few. Most of this is an interaction funded by the public to improve the economic situation for the state of California. So that gives you some of the learnings from the book. You can pick it up, and if you're interested, read these case studies in more depth to see the richness of how these interactions work. So this is where, who invents, who creates new firms? And I just give a list of firms, and then I color-coded them. Red are unlicensed, yellow stars are students. Right, Michael Dell, Microsoft, Facebook, right, Yahoo, Sun Microsystem, no licenses, and spin-offs. Qualcomm, Linkabit, Qualcomm. That's Irwin Jacobs. We have a whole chapter on the Linkabit Qualcomm case study, where you can actually see how that interaction over time evolved from a professor, Irwin Jacobs, now a billionaire, spinning off, creating a company called Linkabit, which eventually he then creates called Qualcomm. He's given $150 million back to the University of California, San Diego. There was no licensing involved. He was just a bright guy who got an idea and left and started this extremely successful firm. So what I'm trying to show you here about the university is we have done a lot, but we have to give everybody opportunities to experiment. And we can't just think about the professors or even the graduate students. I mean, some of these are undergraduates. I mean, remember, we've got two terrible failures here. Bill Gates, who never graduated, and Mark Zuckerberg never graduated. These would be failures in the estimation of our administration. They came in and they didn't graduate. Well, are they failures, or does the university need to start to rethink what it is that we're doing here? And is it a place where people can learn and experiment? Hey, if they don't graduate, does it matter if they go on to create value, that they did something at the university and then they left and created value, and yeah, they don't have a bachelor's degree or a PhD, but they've created value for society? All I'm doing is posing that question because I think we as educators, and we as, I'm not a university administrator, but university administrators need to think through, what is it that we're really doing for society here? And we may have to broaden our horizons. And obviously, I'm not encouraging every student to drop out, but we need to think through those things. The Yahoo founders and the Google founders, both of them, none of them graduated with their PhDs. Were they failures? Well, I mean, you can interpret that however you'd like. So, we need to think of universities also. It's not our only goal. We're industry seed, we seed industries. We seed firms, but sometimes the firms become industries. Now, should that be our only goal? Well, of course not. We need the reason we're industry seeders is because we're on the cutting edge of research, and hopefully we're on the cutting edge of teaching. And that creates the seed corn from which new firms and economic development can occur. So personnel leaving universities can be seen as knowledge carriers, and it's in many different disciplines, right? So if one thinks of SAS comes out of North Carolina State, out of the statistics department. I mean, SAS employs probably 11,000 people in extremely highly paid jobs, but has created an ecosystem of tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. Quintiles, the big biomedical research, global biomedical research firm, came out of UNC statistics department. So both of these came out of the consulting process. They started as consultants and they said, oh my gosh, I can do better. Now, in both cases, the professors left the university, which was a loss to the university, but they created value for North Carolina in both of those cases. Then we need to think about when universities create seeds. If you look, and I built some databases of university spin-offs. Universities create firms. These firms spin out. Some of the firms are just firms. They grow, but they don't create whole new industries. Then there are other firms. The case study of Hybritech, UC San Diego, a biotech firm, spun out of UC San Diego, and out of Hybritech, the whole UC San Diego biotech cluster, which has been enormously successful. It's one of the 3 largest clusters of biotech firms in the world. Really, almost every firm can trace itself back to Hybritech. Eli Lilly bought Hybritech. Everybody got wealthy. They left and created new firms. And what happened was an entrepreneurial cascade was created that created a cluster. So when we think about clusters, very often clusters are developed through entrepreneurial cascades. Steve Klepper has written a lot about this, how one firm begets another firm, and you start to get a cascade. And 10, 15 years later, what you have is an entrepreneurial cluster that has really become an economic development powerhouse. You've seen a little of that. We've done some research in Madison, Wisconsin, and you've seen some of that, but not truly powerful cascades, which don't happen that often. But those cascades are the ones that really build regional innovation systems, regional ecosystems that become very powerful economic development tools. If you looked at Napa, Napa is a case study of entrepreneurial cascades coming out of the early firms. Now, this wasn't university created, but the university put the knowledge in that helped that entrepreneurial cascade of new wineries starting one after the other, helping it be turbocharged. Okay, commercialization versus engagement. Well, what we need to think about is, I'd say, instead of commercialization, but this bi-directional knowledge flow. And we have to be very careful not to disrupt this bi-directional knowledge flow and encourage the interaction with local industry by our professors, our students. Again, in the goal of doing research and, of course, educating students. The goal of the university cannot be just to do very mundane work for local industry. I don't think that's what the university could do or should do. We need to see people as conduits, people moving back and forth. Again, a more porous university boundary. Doesn't mean the university is industry, doesn't mean the industry is university, but the ability to interact. Consulting is learning, right? Not consulting as just some money making. I mean, it needs to be controlled, obviously. It can't be just wild, but consulting is a learning process. The porous boundaries I mentioned. Patenting and licensing should only be complements to the university research and training missions, not the be all, the end all, and the goal. The goal is research and training and, of course, interaction, not just patenting and licensing. But universities need to be careful. There are many, many cases now of universities acting like patent trolls, right? The Columbia case recently was a particularly egregious, where they tried submarine patents. They tried to get their patent lengthened by going to a congressman who was a Columbia graduate. It was really a case where the university was looking at this just as a moneymaker, not as a tech transfer process. Of course, we now have universities suing their own professors for supposedly taking university knowledge and commercializing it. We're having a big issue now about the strawberry patents here at UC Davis, our most valuable patents. The researchers want to leave and take the genetic the cultivars with them, make copies and take them. Big problem. Lots of lawsuits. Do we want to reward professors who have valuable inventions and not great research? How should we reward the professors? Now, one way they're rewarded, if the invention gets picked up, they get 35% at UC Davis of the income that is generated. But do we want to reward professors more for inventing, but not for great research? Professors with firms can act unethically, withhold information, stop contributing to the global information commons, exploit students, and in the worst case, and we have had cases of lying, cheating, etc. Some of it is, of course, prosecutable. So, we want to have porous boundaries, but we have to understand the university and industry and firms are different kinds of institutions and work differently. So, the university's contribution is social good. Train great employees, increase the social knowledge base upon which commercialization can occur, commercialize research and earn money for the university, provide private sector with patentable knowledge. Should that be our goal? Be an economic development pole. And then if we do all of the above or some of the above, will we still educate, aware, and engage citizens? So one of the issues that university administrators face is to balance all of these goals. I mean, corporations only need to balance one goal, basically, make profit. I mean, that's being a little bit simplistic, but we have so many goals as an institution that we need to balance. So our conclusion for the book was that in a knowledge society, we cannot force the multifaceted role into one small narrow box, and we need to encourage experimentation, as I gave sort of the example. How can we encourage our undergraduates, even our undergraduates, to create a new Dell or create a new Microsoft, to create value for society in that way, to use their creativity while they're at this institution, which is dedicated to knowledge creation. How can we encourage that? So with that, I'm going to come to an end. It's been about 45 minutes. The new book is on the right side, and one of my older books, Understanding Silicon Valley, is on the right side, the left side. And if you have any questions, be happy to respond.
Okay, Martin, thank you for that. It was very insightful. So I just changed the screen. Hopefully it'll set up on your computer pretty quick if it hasn't done so already. So if you'll go ahead and take a moment and reflect a little bit on what we've heard in the presentation, and enter your questions into the chat box at the bottom. And Martin, right off the bat, I've got one question for you. I'm kind of thinking about this from a policy perspective. And that is, let's say you have one policy that you could change and maybe broadly across universities. So based on your research, and you wanted to impact the states in which these universities exist, what policy do you think that might be? What would work?
Yeah, thank you, John. So from my perspective, the policy that I would urge is that universities and the tech licensing offices be much more willing and rapid in giving the inventor the patent. If the patent isn't working, if the knowledge isn't working, just turn it back to the inventor as soon as possible and let the inventor try to do something with that knowledge. Because I think what I'm hearing from researchers all across the country is that the tech transfer offices are treating this knowledge well, that they're concerned about, for example, professors becoming wealthy from the knowledge by going out and starting a firm, and therefore are frustrating this technology transfer. So when we have the new knowledge, let's get it out. And if the tech transfer offices, in many cases, are more like university bureaucracies, and in some public universities, the university bureaucracy can actually stifle this transfer process because many of them are slow, and in some cases the tech transfer offices, remember, the tech transfer office is getting disclosures from the entire campus, and there's only, let's say, 10 tech transfer offices. How can they, tech transfer officers, people who look at the technology, how can they understand all these different fields, all of which, this technology is very deep. I mean, these professors are doing deep research, so they may not even understand the technology and its opportunities. So the tech transfer offices, I think, have to become far more willing to let the professors or the inventors go out and try to create a new firm, to be an entrepreneur and not stand in their way, which some people I've heard accuse them of. Yes.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions in our question box. So for you in the audience, you will not necessarily be able to see everybody's questions as they'll come in, but we'll take them as we get them. And so again, please just take a moment and type those in. So the next question that I've got up here, it says, so some firms are just firms. Let me click into this. Some firms are just firms. They grow and employ people, but they don't generate new industries. So then the question goes to, so should universities emphasize research on operating systems, new technology platforms, and other industry creating innovations?
That's a good, very good question. So there's two sets of answers there. Universities as institutions don't really control the professorial research agenda. So if they decided to do that, then they would obviously have to put money behind it. And for electrical engineering and computer science, this is obviously one of the areas of great interest, as of course data science is one area of great interest. Would that be a good strategy for electrical engineering and computer science? Yes. So let's see. Clarifying the first line, a paraphrase. Clarifying the first line was a paraphrase. Okay. So going back to some firms are just firms, they grow and employ people, but they don't generate new industries. Well, that's an observation. And of course, everybody is happy if a new firm spins off and creates new jobs in the region. That's an economic development goal. It's more of an observation. It's a little that what even becomes more important, and where universities have played a role, it's hard to say how one would, from a policy perspective, choose in advance, this firm, right, is going to spawn new industries, is going to spawn spin-off after spin-off, because some firms do and some firms don't. And it's a little hard to say which ones will. Some people have rather tongue-in-cheek said the best thing possible is have a large outside firm come in and buy the firm and destroy it. So Hybertech was bought by Eli Lilly. Everybody goes, oh God, I can't stand this big firm, and they all spun out and started new firms. Fairchild Semiconductor, or which put the silicon in Silicon Valley, was purchased by a company called Fairchild. Once Fairchild bought it, everybody said, oh my God, we're in a big company, let's leave and start new companies. So kind of waggishly, you could tongue-in-cheek say that. Linkabit, from which Qualcomm came, was actually bought by MACOM out of Massachusetts, and Irwin Jacobs and all of his colleagues said, oh my God, we don't like this firm, let's spin off, and then they started another one. So, so it's hard to predict which firms will generate new industries. The research by Steve Klepper and others show that acquisition by a large firm often was a trigger for those folks who now had some money to go out and start a new firm. So, so I don't think we in the research community really know which firms will generate a new industry. And I think that Steve Klepper, who had passed away, and a few others have been doing research on it, but we just don't know. That's the answer. We don't know in the economic development community which ones will do that. So not a fully satisfactory answer, I apologize, but I think that's where we are.
Okay, so next question from Bruce. Is there a concern that private industry researchers coming to the campus aren't versed in educational concepts?
Well, that's a good question. The case studies that we saw, of course, we were looking mostly at successful case studies. So we weren't sampling a population. We had case studies and we focused on successful case studies. The private industry researchers in those cases that came were PhDs. They were coming out of a research environment, and like Bell Labs, but not just Bell Labs, Intel, etc. Those folks were able to teach, and they were teaching advanced graduate students because we're talking about cutting edge knowledge. And of course, they were doing research with the professors. So the kinds of folks we were looking in our case studies were sort of PhDs. So they certainly understood research. They were very important in teaching graduate students. For example, the Unix case, they were very important for teaching it because they were actually developing the software at the time. So I don't think in the case studies we saw that was an issue. But it is a good question, and I would say there the key issue are the faculty that are inviting this private industry researcher would have to be aware, and we have to trust them to choose to allow very good people to come in the same way as I think our great universities, I see you're at University of Minnesota, has recruited people from around the world as graduate students and professors also, but keeping University of Minnesota great, they're going to recruit great grad students. So I think there have to trust the departments to do a good job. Yeah, that would be my answer there.
Okay, thanks for that. So the next question is from Mark, and this kind of fits into the webinar series that I talked about at the very beginning that we're doing here at the NCRCRD. But his question is, what role should the university and/or extension play to assist small firms that have patents but need business management assistance and access to capital?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. First of all, for the university, they should be encouraging small firms that have intellectual property to be going for SBIRs and STTRs and help them do that. And I know Wisconsin is pretty active in that process. I don't think actually the UCs have done as good a job as they could. The business management assistance and access to capital. Well, the access to capital side is pretty tough, and but where the university and extension in this particular space is they need to hook up with local angels and the local angel groups, and they could become or help become focal points, networkers, doing that aspect of what extension I think could certainly play a role there of being a networker, being the connecting point to pull people together. Uh, because I don't think anybody's going to give extension, let's say, $10 million to start investing. I don't think that's going to play that way. Universities as investors themselves, some universities are doing that. UCLA is starting a project like that. The history has not been good, giving the university venture capital, and the university as an investor hasn't been so successful. Business management assistance, um, in their university extension, not agricultural extension, but university extension here at Davis and in a number of universities offers business management courses, etc. And business management assistance could also be, of course, part of the networking. Access to capital and business management assistance can be part of organizing groupings, and angels sometimes are the people who give business management assistance because many of them are successful business persons. That might be the way to go. And there are examples across the country where universities have tried it. I think, again, Wisconsin has been a pretty successful role model of how things can and should be done. And I'm not denigrating the others. That's just, I know Wisconsin has been very active in this space.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question from Tim. Uh, there are a number of indications that entrepreneurship is not as vibrant after the Great Recession as it was before. Do universities have a role in helping reignite the entrepreneurial economy?
Good question, right? So I probably so let me first address the predicate there. There are a number of indications. There's certainly data that show this in some overall surveys, and the Kaufman Foundation has done a lot of work along these lines. Of course, I don't see that in the Bay Area. I don't see that actually in the wine industry in Napa, Sonoma. We're seeing a lot of entrepreneurship. Um, so I think that part of this issue may be, and we know this, during downturns, people who have jobs tend to stay with them. Uh, Jobs are tight. You don't go out and be an entrepreneur. Jobs are not tight. When jobs are tight, you can be an entrepreneur because you always go back and find a job. When you have a great recession where there aren't a lot of good jobs, then you don't leave your existing good job. And the most successful entrepreneurs are, of course, people with high levels of human capital. A high level of human capital, you go out and try to become an entrepreneur. So I think when you have a broken economy, you actually see less entrepreneurship of the kind we're talking about, not entrepreneurship of a person opening let's say a taco shop or a sandwich shop on a shoestring. But I think we are in some parts of the economy seeing lots of entrepreneurship. The Bay Area is a great case study. Biotech is still doing pretty well. We're seeing the food truck phenomenon, but not the old food truck phenomenon, but the high-end food truck phenomenon, which is a kind of entrepreneurship. So I think if you see sectors, you look at sectors, there is entrepreneurship. Though overall, I think you're right. We're seeing that it is not as vibrant. We're seeing sectors where there's a lot of vibrancy. Universities have a role in helping to reignite the entrepreneurial economy. Well, so universities are certainly teaching entrepreneurship courses. Over the last 20 years, the rise in entrepreneurship courses has been quite dramatic. Um, Many universities are now training or offering training to scientists, graduate students or scientists in entrepreneurship. Um, so does the university have a role? Well, I would say, for example, loosen up tech licensing offices to give the knowledge, the inventions and patents to the professors or the inventors, whoever they may be, so they can more easily start a new firm. I think we can do a few things along those lines, but there are some larger things in the economy that are broken, and until those are solved, I don't think we're going to see a massive efflorescence of entrepreneurship. So, so we can do some things, but probably there's a lot more that needs to be done at the political level. That and the universities, I don't think, are in a position to affect that very greatly, except perhaps as a bully pulpit from our university leadership. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is from Andy. You touched on this a little bit. So he asks, why can't we just expedite the patent licensing process, giving ownership to the faculty, but charge a fair royalty payment for the development of those patents on the public's dime?
Well,
Wouldn't that resolve the conflict?
yeah, Andy, I would like you to communicate this to university administrators across the country who believe that they're going to that the newest invention is going to be a Google, the newest professorial invention, and therefore they have to lock that up and make sure that the university extracts every single penny as soon as possible from that invention, which of course for small firms means that they're paying the university before they have any income, which means their burn rate. Um, and for large firms mean, oh my God, we have to bargain with these university tech licensing offices, and we have to extract. They believe they have to extract every penny, and we're going to and the university is going to really stick it to them to make a lot of money. Uh, that isn't going to work. That's not working. That is happening. I agree with you. Expedited patent licensing process. Uh, North Carolina has been experimenting with that. I don't know how far that's gone. Uh, Charge a potentially a fair royalty payment. Royalty payments, are what is fair is always up to debate. Uh, but I don't. I think at this time, many tech licensing offices are not interested in fair, whatever that word might mean, but the most possible. Um, so the so I agree with you totally in that the we need our tech licensing offices to or tech transfer offices to see themselves as get it as the most important thing they can do is get the technology out there, uh, and even a low royalty payment or even none, if we can create great new firms, may be the most important thing, particularly your small entrepreneurial firms, which tend to stay local and therefore tend to employ people locally and then tend to strengthen the ecosystem around the university, which may lead to yet more activity. It seems to me that were I thinking as a public university administrator or a legislature, that would be a bigger goal than the royalty payments, which in most cases aren't going to amount to much of anything. In a few cases, will be a very large amount of money. But the question is, do you want to gamble? Is for the public policy perspective, is gambling for the big return by squeezing everything to get that big return better than saying, look, the other gamble is I'll just let this technology out and hope that it creates something in the local ecosystem. And obviously, the technology was developed at that university, so some of the most capable people are at that university where the technology was developed. So, so yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I would be even a little more radical. I would just let it out and hope that the return would come in the future from new firm formation, etc. But I'm pretty radical on this one. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So our next question, it asks, Extension is excellent at transferring campus research to businesses and communities. How could we play a more active role in guiding the research that takes place on campuses to address observed and observed community and business problems and opportunities? And again, that kind of fits into the webinar series a little bit that we've talked
Yeah.
about.
That's a good question, because one could imagine programs here at UC Davis. There's a program where researchers are made aware of how to address community or business problems and opportunities. Again, guiding researchers is a fairly difficult process given the way the university is organized. So myself, I get grants from the National Science Foundation. I don't ask the university, can I do this? Is this research the university would like done? I go out and I raise the money. Most of the researchers that we're talking about here go out and raise the money for their research. Now, they then respond to financial incentives. It's a little different in College of Agriculture, where the Enology and Viticulture department really does respond to the observed community and business problems. So guiding them may be difficult. Perhaps creating awareness through programs. UC Davis has an educational program out of the Center for Entrepreneurship that will educate researchers on how they might go about that. Beyond doing that, I don't think it will be very easy to guide researchers, because the very nature of how most researchers are funded in the University of California, in all research universities, it's not much guidance. I think what one could think about or do, and this happened at Stanford and UCSD, both of which have been very successful in creating entrepreneurial activity around the university, is that administrators encourage it. Say, this is a good thing. It's a good thing when a professor or a graduate student goes out and creates a new firm. Maybe not reward them, but reward them with recognition. I think that may be more guiding the community towards thinking about this. That might create more value than actually trying to say, Martin, you need to change your research in this way because it could do X, Y, Z. I don't think that's going to work in the American Research University as constituted today. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, so it looks like we've gotten to all of our questions. So I'm going to change the screens one more time,
Okay.
and see if I can make this happen. Okay.
There we go.
So the poll questions are up. I'm going to go ahead and, as promised, publish these. They're actually still open if in the audience you want to participate. And I've included a couple of links at the very bottom. So there's a link to the NCRCRD page. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, and so if you're not connected with me, please do so. I've got Martin's and my email address on the page, and then also the link to the site, the Stanford site for the book, on the chance that You want to take a look at that site. Um, and with that, I want to say thank you so much, Martin. I really appreciate your participation in your presentation. It was very insightful, very good presentation, and thank you in the audience for your participation. So in closing, Martin, do you have any kind of parting thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think given the current nature of our economy, we need to the universities need to think about how can they continue to help the economy. And the other thing is that the American university system has been extremely productive of new technologies, and the state of California's economy is now dependent upon those new technologies. And there are things to be learned, I think, from what we saw from the UC system, and the value that the UC system and the public universities in general create for their states is not sufficiently appreciated in the state houses. And I would encourage those other researchers out there to maybe do similar projects for their state to make people aware of the contribution that we in the public universities have made. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Um, and again, I'm going to keep this page up. One last thought for those of you still with us. Um, so if you would like a link to this recording, I've recorded the webinar. Please send me an email, and I will send that to you. And Martin, once again, thank you so much. I really
Great.
appreciate your
Thank you.
participation in this.
Yep. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. And we'll wrap up the webinar here. Thank you so much.